So let's get right into it. So the Mishnah says that the Kohen Gadol and the Nazir are walking down the road and they find a mate mitzvah. The question is, which one goes first, right? There's a machloket, is the Kohen Gadol mitame first or the Nazir? Says the Gemara, but obviously each individually is supposed to be mitame. So how do we know that? Yesterday we started deriving from Kohen Gadol. Remember the psukim. So there's three different, I would say, psukim that describe relatives, right? So the pasuk by Kohen Hedyot says the Kohen should not become tamei, and then he gives a list of the 7 people that he could become tamei to, right? Aviv, imo, achiv, achoto, children and spouse, etc. By the Kohen Gadol, just says he shouldn't become tamei la'aviv u'li'imo. Okay, so lo yitamu, right? So it says don't akon nafshot meit lo yavo, right? Don't. That's what we quoted yesterday. The pasuk. Don't go close to any nefesh mate, right? Don't encounter anyone who's dead, basically. Tamei. La'avivu limo. So we talked yesterday. Why does it say la'avivu limo? From saying akol nefshot mate lo yavo, I would say don't go near anyone, including relatives, because you can't be less than the Kohen Hedyot. So why do we say aviv limo? And we said yesterday the word aviv is extra, and it's there to tell you a Kohen Gadol should not become tamei to his father, but he can become tamei to someone else, and that someone else is a meit mitzvah. So that was yesterday's daf. We're at the top word, just in time. Thanks for joining on daf mem chet 48 of Nazir. First word on the line is what about the word le'imo, right? So it says by Kohen Gadol, don't become tamei to anyone. I would have included everyone. Then it enumerates aviv and your father and your mother. So your father, we said, is extra to tell you that you can be tamei to a meit mitzvah. What about li'imo? What's the purpose of saying you cannot be mitamei to your mother? I would have known that. Says the Gemara, l'gzer shava. In fact, that's for the gzer shava of Rebbe. Titania, the gzer shava of Rebbe, which we actually quoted earlier in the week, is Rebbe Omer. Rebbe says, let us go and learn something interesting from Nazir. By Nazir, I don't really have the psukim in front of me, but by Nazir, the pasuk says, I'm never going to find it here. Okay, sorry. So the exact pasuk, I said I don't want to quote it off the top of my head. By Nazir, it says not to become tamei, right? It says aviv v'limo achiv achoto lo yitamu b'motam, in the words, right? Don't become tamei when they are dead. Now, of course, that's a little redundant because if they're alive, you're not tamei to them, right? So what does it mean? Lo yitamu b'motam. Don't become tamei when they're dead. So it says the Gemara, we actually use that, as we said earlier in the week, Rebbe Omer, Gabi Nazir, it says bimotam. And that tells you that specifically the kind of tum'ah, that's death. Bimotam eino mitamei, avo mitamei u'lenega'am u'lezivatam. Right? When we say a Nazir can't become tamei, it does not mean any tum'ah. If a Nazir's mother or sibling has tzarat, and they want to go take care of that person, you're going to become tamei by taking care of them. But that's okay. You'll become tamei. You'll have to, whatever, become tahar again. But that's not a prohibition of a Nazir becoming tamei. It's only tumat mate, only tumah of a death, basically. So that is a halacha that we learned by Nazir from the extra word where it says bimotam, right? Don't ayitamu bimotam. Ainli ala ben Nazir. So I only know that's true about a Nazir who can't become tamei, but that's confined to death, tumat mate. But the Kohen Gadol minayin, Kohen Gadol doesn't say the word b'motam. It just says, don't become tamei. So how do I know that a Kohen Gadol is allowed, like a Nazir, to become tamei to someone who's not tumat mate? Amrit, so we said, the way we know that is from Gzera Shava, from comparing Kohen Gadol to Nazir, because the words are extra. Lo yomar imo b'Kohen Gadol. It doesn't really need to say the word imo, mother, by Kohen Gadol. Tell me, Kohen Gadol is not mitamei to his mother because she'ain tamalomar sharikav v'chomer. I know I would understand without the pasuk that a Kohen Gadol cannot become tamei to his mother because it's a kavachomer. What's the kavachomer? A very interesting kavachomer. Ma'im b'makom shekohen hedyot mitamei l'achiv me'aviv. One of the fascinating halachot which we talk about a lot and don't always mention is that, when you talk about relatives, right, which the Torah clearly talks about, you become tamei to your mother, you don't become tamei to your second cousin, you can, et cetera, et cetera. The very interesting thing is that relatives are never very confident, right, in some way, because no one really knows, at least in those times, who their father was, right? There's an assumption. You know where your mother is if you have witness, right? Because the mother is very direct. Let's put it that way, right? But it's impossible prior to DNA testing to be almost impossible unless you're confined in a prison, right? Blah blah blah. But usually you take it on faith, you take it on belief. This is the person. They look like that person, etc. So there's always an uncertainty about the person's father, right? Having said that, and that's true, and we acknowledge that la'alacha. Having said that, there's also halacha that your yichus in some ways goes after your father, not your mother. Meaning a kohen in this, becomes a kohen if their father's a kohen, not if their mother's a kohen, right? Or bat kohen. It doesn't matter. So the reason that matters is that when we talk about a kohen hedyot, interestingly, a kohen hedyot is not allowed to become tamei to anyone except for their relatives, right? Now the question then comes, who's a relative? So the pasuk says your brother and your sister, right? We learned, and we're going to learn this again, that when you talk about your brother, it means a brother who you share a father with, or a sister, the same thing. Not a brother or sister who you share a mother with. Meaning, if that person, in this case, in this context of Kohen, because it says by Kohanim, the mishpachotam, the beit avotam, right? Your mishpachot go after your father's household. So if a person is a half sibling with a brother who's from his mother, he can't become tamei if he's a Kohen. If it's from his father, he can become tamei, right? Now, the thing about that, of course, is that a person whose brother from the same father is basically a double suffix, because you don't know if it's your father, you don't know if it's his father, right? So, if you were brothers from a mother, you could be very certain, with certainty, that you're brothers. But when your brother or sister, it's not nothing to do with brother or sister here, but when you're a sibling from a father, that introduces uncertainty, right? So that's our kal v'chomer. Because since the Torah says that a Kohen, a regular Kohen, can become tamei to his brother from his father, even though the actual relationship is a little bit, on less than 100%, in any case, right? So I'm going to read that inside. But even so, ain kohen gadol mitamei la'aviv, right? A kohen gadol couldn't become tamei to a person who's his father because Torah says that, right? It says don't become tamei to your father. So makom she'ain kohen hadyot mitamei la'achiv me'imo. We don't let a kohen hedyot become tamei to his brother if he just shares a mother, because that relationship is not, for whatever reason, and I'm not giving a reason here, but it just is not close enough that it would make him abrogate his halachot of tumah of kohen, and so he cannot become tamei to a brother who he only shares a mother with. So clearly, the maternal connection in this case, in terms of tumah, is not as strong, right? So eno din she'ein kohen gadol mitamei l'imo. So certainly a kohen gadol can't become tamei to his mother. Right? So that seems like a kal v'chomer. It's saying that in terms of relationships, the paternal relationships are more meaningful, and still a kohen gadol can't become tamei to his father, so he certainly shouldn't be tamei to his mother. So that's a kal v'chomer. So you don't need a pasuk to tell me that a kohen gadol cannot become tamei to his mother. So it says where continue the bright. So if you know this already from kal v'chomer, ma tamul omer imo b'kohen gadol. So why does it say the word kohen gadol by kohen gadol that he shouldn't become tamei to his mother? Mufna, it's extra, and it's extra to tell you let's start searching. The Torah is trying to tell us something. It's lahakish. It's telling you a hekish. Uladoni menu. It's not really a hekish. It's gzera shava. It's telling you look elsewhere. Uladoni menu gzera shava. Learn a gzera shava from somewhere else where the Torah says the word mother in the same context, and that's by a Nazir, right? By a Nazir, it says the exact same thing. Don't become tamei to your mother. So nemar imo bin Nazir says the word imo about tuma about a Nazir. Nemar imo b'kohen gadol. And what are we going to learn now? Ma imo amor bin Nazir. We said because it says bin motam eno mitameh. Don't become tamei to your mother or to anyone when they're dead. But you can become tamei to them if they have tzarat or some other kind of tumah. Af imo amor b'kohen gadol. Therefore, the limud, the teaching of imo by kohen gadol is also by kohen gadol b'motam eno mitamei avu mitamei l'niga'am u'lezivatam. So that is how we know, and that's why we use the extra verse of imo by kohen gadol, is to tell you it's similar to a Nazir, and just like by Nazir, the tumah only is tumat mate, but a different kind of tumah, like tzarat, which is similar to mate, right? Because we talk about tzarat as being like they're dead. Remember, like Miriam said, right? Al nati mate. So we exclude tumat tzarat, and a kohen gadol, like a Nazir, can become tamei with tzarat, right? So that is the words Aviv and Imo by Kohen Gadol. Says the now smack in the middle of the daf, right? I guess it's really in the middle. Ashkechan Kohen Gadol. So we found the source that a Kohen Gadol can be tamei to a mate mitzvah, Nazir minolan. How do you know that a Nazir can become tamei to a mate mitzvah? Tanya, and it's based on the following bright. Bright says, Kol Yemei Hiziro Hashem, all the days that he's a Nazir to Hashem, al nefesh mate lo yavo. The word mate here is a little bit questionable because we're about to darshan it, but let's just read what it says. It doesn't matter so much, right? So al nefesh mate lo yavo. You shouldn't go to a soul of a dead body, right? Now, it says the Gemara, how do you know what kind of person that's, right? What that's referring to? Shomei ani. And I read that pasuk, I would have thought, I feel nefesh mamash. That when we say that a Nazir cannot go to a nefesh mate, the body of a dead object, maybe it means animals. Maybe if his horse dies, he can't go and take care of the horse, right? And where do we find that an animal is called a nefesh? Kinyan shenemar makin nefesh behima, right? We do talk about you're hurting the soul of an animal. So again, a whole very interesting topic, but you can see that an animal should be included. Talmud Omer says the Braita, therefore it says al nefesh mate lo yavo, which is why, but we weren't dashing the word mate before, that it's the nefesh of a dead thing. It's not just a nefesh, it's a nefesh of a dead thing, and we never use that terminology by an animal, even though we do talk about mate by an animal, right? We say the mate yelo by the nezek, we don't use the word nefesh mate. We don't talk about it as a soul of a dead body. So therefore it says al nefesh mate lo yavo, to tell you benefesh adam hakatuv medaber, the Torah is only referring to human corpses, okay? That is the Tanakh. Rabbi Yishmael Omer, I don't need a pasuk to tell me that a Kohen, that a Nazir can only be mitamei to people. Sharehu Omer, it already says lo yavo, right? Don't come. Now, remember, usually you become tamei if you touch any dead person or a dead animal on the nevela by touching it, right? But the Torah doesn't say don't touch it. It says don't come in. Coming in implies walking into the same room, which is what we call tumat ohel, right? Now, tumat ohel does not apply to an animal. A nevela, a dead animal, is only mitamei if you touch it or eat it, right? But if you go into the same room as it, there's no tumat ohel by an animal. So says Rabbi Yishmael, the fact that it said lo yavo, don't come in, implying a level of tumah that happens when you walk in, it's only referring to people. The nefashot mitamot bebiyah katuv medaber. It was referring to the nefashot, souls, human souls in this case, that are mitamei when you walk into the room. Okay, so that's the first part of the Braita, not what we're actually talking about today, or for our purposes. The next words in the Braita are, it's a long Braita, le'aviv ulimo eno mitamei, right? That a Nazir should not be mitamei to his mother and his father. It also says his brother and sister, but we'll start with that. Le'aviv ulimo eno mitamei. The implication is, to those people, he can't become tamei. Ava mitamei hu lemeit mitzvah. But he can, there's someone else he can be tamei to, and that is a meit mitzvah. Now, how do you, we're going to keep reading. It doesn't make sense yet, right? Says the Gemara, keep going, and this is still all quoting the Braita. An shelo ye'omar, right? Why do you need to say this? Because yeshli badin, because I have a kalvachomer. Ma kohen gadol shekdushato kedushat olam. Kohen gadol has eternal kedusha. Once you become kohen gadol, you're kodesh forever. But we know from the pasuk that we quoted yesterday, mitamei lemeit mitzvah. The kohen gadol can never become tamei. Is allowed to become tamei in a circumstance of a meit mitzvah. So Nazir she'en kedushato kedushat olam, which you'll recall is what we quoted in our Mishnah, eno din she'yitamei lemeit mitzvah. So we don't need a pasuk for that. Why don't we learn it from the Kavachomer? Says the Braita, lo, that's not correct, because you could look at another side, which is what we quoted in our Mishnah. Imamarta bekohen gadol. It might only be true that a kohen gadol is mitamei lemeit mitzvah. Shekein eno mevi karban al tumato. Right, a kohen gadol is not allowed to become tamei, but if they do, they don't bring a special karban. Tomar ben Nazir, it might not apply. You can't say that it applies to Nazir. Shemevi karban al tumato. A Nazir has an extra halacha that if they become tamei, they actually have to bring a karban. Maybe they're stringent. Maybe the tumah requirement of a Nazir is holier, more strict than that of a kohen gadol. And even though a kohen gadol can be mitamei to a meit mitzvah, a Nazir cannot. Right? These are the words again. Since a Nazir has to bring a karban, lo yitamei lemeit mitzvah. So I would not have learned it from comparison to Kohen Gadol, because I cannot automatically say that a Nazir is less strict than a Kohen Gadol. Talmud Lomar, therefore the pasuk says, La'aviv u'li'imo lo yitama, right? It could have just said, don't become tamei to anybody, which is what it did say. Why did it then add, your mother and your father don't become tamei, to tell you there's someone else who you could become tamei. Avim tamei hu l'meit mitzvah. You can become tamei. I added the word who there. Avim tamei l'meit mitzvah. You can become tamei to a meit mitzvah. So that is our sort of first attempt in the Braita of this, using the pasuk to tell me that a Nazir is mitamei to a meit mitzvah. Continues the Braita, we're 3 lines in the bottom, the end of the line. Maybe the Torah is telling you something else completely, which is a fascinating question. Maybe the Torah is saying a Nazir should not become tamei. To his mother and his father, you shouldn't become tamei. And what's the limud there? Maybe, eno, that mitamei la'aviv u'limo, sorry, sorry, maybe it's telling you, eno mitamei la'aviv u'limo. Oh, maybe it's, it's telling you don't become tamei to your mother or father, aval yitamei l'shar meitim. Maybe it's saying, in fact, it only applies to your relatives. Flip the whole thing around. Maybe the only prohibition of a Nazir becoming tamei is to close relatives. Maybe that's the whole point of a Nazir, right? We're saying don't break your familial ties, or whatever. I mean, whatever meaning you can give to it, right? Don't separate yourself from being a tamei to your parents. But maybe, in fact, we don't care if you're tamei to somebody else. Well, that seems a little far-fetched, right? Because Amri Kal V'chomer. What about, there's other cases where that doesn't make any sense. Look at a Kohen Hedyot, right? A Kohen Hedyot, a regular Kohen, is definitely mitamei l'krovim. They can be mitamei to their mother, their father, their siblings, right? But the Torah explicitly says, "Eino mitamei l'shar meitim." Don't become tamei to a regular, unrelated, dead body. So certainly Nazir, which you're saying clearly, the Torah says, "Eino mitamei" to your mother and father, l'krovim. It's certainly a kal v'chomer that they can't become tamei to other people. So I don't think that is a way anyone would have read the pasuk. It must be, turn the page now, the daf bet, go back to our original reading, Hamat Talmud Omer. So what is the Torah in fact telling us? It's telling us, don't become tamei la'aviv u'limo, specifically who d'lo mitamei, avim tamei hu l'meit mitzvah. Okay, so that is why both why we have the pasuk and how we know that a Nazir is allowed to be mitamei to a meit mitzvah. Okay, 1 second. But the Braita is not willing to give up yet. Says the Braita, I'm still going on. This is all the same Braita we started quoting. Says the Braita, I've got another way to learn. Ad shelo yomar, before the Torah says this, meaning before you prove that this is what the Torah is telling you, yeshli bedin, I can derive this from a kal v'chomer, different kal v'chomer, meaning I can derive that a Nazir is mitamei to a meit mitzvah without the pasuk. Well, how would I learn it? From Kohen Gadol. Because look, Nemrar klalot b'Kohen Gadol. It says some general klalim, right, rules about a Kohen Gadol and who they can become tamei and who they can't become tamei. V'nemru klalot b'Nazir, and it says rules by a Nazir. Why can I say ma klalot tamurot b'Kohen Gadol? This is not a kal v'chomer, right? But this is a comparison, basically. Just like when we say rules, general rules about a Kohen Gadol, the Torah specifically says la'aviv. Let me add the word imo here. Aviv u'limo eno mitamei. Aviv, so you can't tamei to your mother and father, but we learned from there avol mitamei l'meit mitzvah. So why don't I just say from there, av klalot amurot b'Nazir la'aviv eno mitamei avol mitamei l'meit mitzvah. So the Torah says don't become tamei. By Kohen Gadol it said, well, just be clear, it only means your father, your relatives, but you can become tamei to a meit mitzvah. Why would I say the same thing by a Nazir? Says the Gebraita, because there's another klal you have to think of. There's another precedent. And what's the other precedent? Maybe you should lean a different way and say there's precedent by a Kohen Hedyot, right? A Kohen Hedyot also is not allowed to become tamei unnecessarily. So Nemru klalot b'Kohen Hedyot, Nemru klalot b'Nazir, and it says rules about a Nazir. Ma klalot amurot b'Kohen Hedyot, obviously the Torah is very explicit that he can be mitamei la'aviv, right, and his mother and brother and sister. So maybe the same thing would be true by a Nazir. And so therefore, from just comparison, you can't prove that you should compare a Nazir to a Kohen Gadol and be mutar to make mitzvah. Maybe you'd compare a Nazir to a Kohen Hedyot, and you could be mutar to become tamei to any relative. Maybe when the Torah says a Nazir should become tamei, it means to strangers. Maybe relatives is okay. Therefore, you need this pasuk. Talmud lomar. Therefore, you need to say, Laviv ulima lo yitama, that you cannot become tamei to your mother and father if you're a Nazir. Ha lemeit mitzvah mitamei, but you do become tamei to a meit mitzvah, right? That's the Gemara. One final question. This again is one in the Breita. Why do you need the extra persons? Meaning that, as we see by a Nazir, it talks about many other people, right? So ask the Gemara, so before I get there, how can you say that the word aviv is extra by a Nazir to tell you, don't become tamei to your father, but you can become tamei to a meit mitzvah? Don't you need the pasuk to tell you that you are not allowed to become tamei to your father? Maybe I would have thought you can't become tamei to many people, but your father is very close to you. Maybe you could. Says, well, you're right. You do need aviv to tell you that. Ela aviv lomar she'im tamei la'aviv. The word aviv by Nazir says, don't become tamei to your father, right? Now remember, by Nazir, there's 4 relatives who we mentioned. Aviv, imo, achiv, and achoto, right? So the first pasuk says, don't become tamei. We're saying now, how would I have known that includes my father? Therefore, the Torah specifically has to say, don't become tamei to your father, okay? Now, achiv, we're skipping over the word imo for a second. The achiv that it says is extra. Because if you can't become tamei to your father, you certainly can't become tamei to your brother. So why does the Torah then say, don't become tamei to your brother? That's telling you, achiv eino mitamei, halameit mitzvah mitamei. That's the extra one, to tell you, don't be tamei to your brother, but you can become tamei to a meit mitzvah. Now, the word imo that we skipped over, that is what we said earlier today. Remember, we started today's daf by saying that it says the word imo by Kohen Gadol, it says the word imo by Nazir. Just like by Kohen Gadol, just like by Nazir, we know that it's ayi tamei b'motam, it's only dead people, the only tumat meit you can't become tamei, but tzarat you can. So by Kohen Gadol, the same thing is true. So the word imo is needed for that gzera shava, like the Rebbe. We need that gzera shava of Rebbe, which we quoted at the beginning of today's daf, to tell you that you compare Nazir to Kohen Gadol. So imo is extra, but it's extra to tell you the gzera shava. So aviv is tell you the halacha, imo is tell you the gzera shava, achiv is extra to tell you that you can be tamei to a meit mitzvah. What about achota? Right? The 4th word in the pasuk is your sister. So we already know you can't become tamei to your parents. You can become tamei to a meit mitzvah. We learned the imo to tell you compare Nazir to Kohen Gadol. What is the 4th relative in this pasuk? Achoto. What do we use with the word achoto? And this is a Gemara we've had many times. Actually, we've had it in Megillah in the beginning, right? It's way back in the second daf of Megillah in Brachot. But the question is, what is the word achoto? Achotoma Talmud Omar. And here continues the Breita, very famous Breita, I guess because a lot of people from Megillah. But the Breita says the following: Hare Shahaya. This is very timely in some ways, at least, right? Hare Shahaya Holech Lishchot et Pischa. Person is going on the road to travel to the Beit HaMikdash with his carbon Pesach right before Pesach, and it could be or, of course, in this pasuk, but we'll discuss this. Or lemolet b'no, or he's going to do a brit milah for his son. He's carrying his child to the milah, or he's going to the child. V'shama shemet lo meit, and he hears that someone who's close to him, who he normally would have to take care of, has died. So he's really stuck here. Right? Not necessarily meit mitzvah. But the problem is, if he goes and he attends to that mate, he's going to become tamei, and he can't bring the carbon pesach, or he may miss out on doing the milah in the right time, right? So what do you do, right? Yachol yitamei. So you might think, doesn't matter. You should go and become tamei. You'll miss your mitzvah of pesach. You'll miss your mitzvah of brit milah, but you've got to deal with what's in front of you. Amrit. So therefore, the Torah says lo yitama, that you should not become tamei. Now, we're learning this from a Nazir, okay? Yachol, you might think, continues the Breita, lo yitamei l'meit mitzvah, that not only can you not become tamei and you'll miss your carbon pesach and not become tamei and miss a brit milah, but you can't even become tamei if it's going to lead to abandoning a meit mitzvah. Therefore, the Torah says the extra word, la'achoto. But don't become tamei to your sister. And again, it doesn't have anything to do with your sister, but it's telling you this is one of the people you can't become tamei to, but there are other people you could become tamei to. And who is that? La'achoto hu de'ino mitamei, ha'le meit mitzvah mitamei. You can become tamei to a meit mitzvah. Now, just to clarify, we already used the pasuk of your brother to tell you can tamei to a meit mitzvah. But the achoto is telling you, what if there are additional prohibitions, right? You're not just a Nazir, let's say. You're a Nazir and you're going to miss your Karban Pesach, you're going to miss Brit Milah, even then, become Tamei and do a Meit Mitzvah. So the Chiddush of Achoto is that you should even become Tamei to a Meit Mitzvah in extenuating circumstances, when you're going to also miss your Karban Pesach or miss your Brit Milah of your child, okay? Misdoing your Brit Milah. So that's the Chiddush. That's the Tanakam. Rabbi Akiva Omer, I'm trying to see how far we should go. We're going to keep going. A few more lines, right? We should at least finish the page. We'll try. Rabbi Akiva says, right? Where am I? Sorry. There we go. Rabbi Akiva says that, no. There's another way I could learn that. I don't need that pasuk. Because the pasuk says, al kol nafshot, right? All nefesh. Nafshot do yavo, it says, right? If it just said al kol nafshot, it says nafshot maybe. But if it just said al kol nafshot do yavo, don't come to any soul, any tumei soul. I would have learned people who are distant, meaning not related to you. You have no specific requirement to become tamei. It says mate. The word mate is extra, and that tells you krovim. That tells you even relatives. That even all your relatives, you can't become tamei to. La'avivu li'imo. Now we'll see why imo is needed. But for your father and your mother, inu mitamei, avu mitamei make mitzvah. It says Rabbi Akiva, I learn out make mitzvah. Right. Well, again, we're going to see in a second how you know that. But Rabbi Akiva says, I don't need the pasuk aviv to tell me I can't become tamei to my father, because the words nefashot mate already tell you that. The word aviv is extra to tell you come tamei lemeit mitzvah. Achiv, what do I do with the third one, which is your brother? That's telling you that Shem haya kohen gadol Nazir. That what if you're both? What if you're a kohen gadol and a Nazir? So Torah says a kohen gadol should not become tamei. Torah says a Nazir should not become tamei. But still, even though you're both levels of Tuma, of Kedusha, the word Achiv tells you that you become Tamei to a Meit Mitzvah, even if you're both a Kohen Gadol and a Nazir, each one of which I knew individually, but you might have thought when you put them together, it overpowers Meit Mitzvah. The word Achiv tells you that it does not. The fourth case, Achoto, is Tanya, for this Praita. Hareisha Haya Olech L'shchot et Pischa V'lamod Peno, that person also, even though you're going to lose out on your mitzvah aseh, which has karet, right? Both Pesach and Brit Milah, if you don't do it, you're chayv karet. So it's clearly a very, very serious mitzvah. Even though you're going to miss the mitzvah, become tamei to a meit mitzvah. So that is all the limudim according to Rabbi Akiva.
But Korban Pesach, you can catch it up on Pesach Sheni, potentially.
Potentially. So it's a good question. The question, it potentially, but you are skipping out on a mitzvah, which is chayav karet, right? So same true about a milah, right? Someone else can do it, but you're missing out on it.
Yeah.
Right. Says the Gemara, but Rabbi Akiva, Zir Shavad Rabbi Minale. But remember that we use the word achiv, we use the word imo, according to earlier today of Rebbe, to compare Kohen Gadol to Nazir. Rebbe just used the whole pasuk to tell you that you can tamei to a meit mitzvah, and you can tamei to a meit mitzvah if you're Kohen Gadol and a Nazir, and a meit mitzvah if you're going to do your miss your Karban Pesach. How does he know the comparison, the Zera Shava of Rebbe, right? So how does he know that? Says, what's my place? Here we go. Amar Lecha, he would tell you, look, Kiva and Amar Mar, this is Rabbi Akiva would say this. Since Mar, meaning since I, Rabbi Akiva, said, Im haya kohen gadol vin nazir, if you're both a kohen gadol and a nazir, la'achiv eino mitamei avu mitamehu l'meit mitzvah. The Torah comes to tell you you cannot become tamei to your brother if you're a kohen gadol or if you're a nazir, but you can become tamei to a meit mitzvah even when you're both, right? So then mali kohen gadol l'chudei, mali nazir v'kohen gadol. Why would you differentiate, right? Why do you need a pasuk to tell you that a Nazir alone, and a Nazir and a Kohen Gadol, meaning once we know both of them, that if you're Kohen Gadol and a Nazir, we don't need an individual pasuk for each one. And so therefore we can sort of compare them to each other. Says the Gemara, okay, but what about Rabbi Yishmael, the opposite side? Rabbi Yishmael didn't agree with Rabbi Akiva and didn't learn relatives from the first psukim. He needed the word aviv to tell me a relative, right? So since you need the word aviv to tell you can't become tamei to a relative, you're one pasuk short. So Rabbi Yishmael, Kohen Gadol v'hu Nazir minale. So how does he know that if you're a Kohen Gadol and a Nazir, that you also can become tamei to a meit mitzvah? Says Rabbi Yishmael, I don't need a pasuk for that. Given the sharach manachad lav gabi meit mitzvah. Right, the Torah already said if you're a Kohen Gadol, you can become meit to a meit mitzvah, even though I said not to become tamei. If you're a Nazir, you become tamei to a meit mitzvah, even though I said not to become tamei. So mali chad lav, mali train lavi. What Torah says, don't worry about the prohibition. What does it matter if it's two prohibitions? I don't think that's a big deal, says Rabbi Yishmael, right? Says, well, that's an interesting thing to say. But if that's true, why do you need the pasuk of Achoto to say if you're walking through the Karban Pesach that you can do a meit mitzvah? You just told me the Torah said one prohibition, two prohibitions. Who cares if you're going to do Karban Pesach? You already told me that meit mitzvah throws away the prohibitions. So Achoto lamali. So why do you need Achoto? Well, that's a little different because that's a different kind of prohibition. I would have thought to say, when the Torah said, don't worry about becoming tamei. Do a meit mitzvah even when I told you not to become tamei. That's a Nazir v'Kohen, or both, the Isur Lavihu. It's a lotase. Avamila Pesach, these two mitzvot aseh are karet, right? They are definitely a higher level of requirement. So I might have thought that in that case, lo yitam la meit mitzvah, not because it's two, right, or one, or whatever. It's because it's a different level of prohibition. By Nazir and Kohen, it's lo yitameh, which is a regular lotase. But by Karban Pesach, it's a mitzvah aseh with karet. By Mila, it's the same thing. So I might have thought in those cases you should not become tamei. You should go do your mitzvah, kamash malan. That in fact you don't go ahead and do your mitzvah. You should become tamei, miss your mitzvah, and do the Karban Pesach. And I think we should stop here, even though we are smack in the middle of a language. But I want to leave something for tomorrow. So and everyone's got to go daven, or some already daven. So Shavua Tov, everyone.
Shavua Tov.
Learning. And I think next week, so we'll talk about Sunday next week, but I think what's it, Shabbat, we're going to learn on before Mincha. So
thank you.
we'll miss you.
Thank you.
Okay, have a good week, everyone.